All right, welcome Web 19, pre-processing day one. This might be one of my favorite days. It's going to be something that's going to help you understand CSS on a new level. I think a lot of people that were kind of like grappling with CSS and like, I want to know it, but I don't know it. Pre-processing actually solidifies it because of the way we write our code. You'll see what I mean shortly. So when it comes to pre-processing, we have two objectives here, but really these could have been exploded out into each individual objective. I just wanted to keep it simple because we are going to be talking about a breadth of things. So variables, mixins, nestings, nested at rules, like they all deserve their own little spotlight, and that's what we're going to give them today in our project. Of course, you have to install Node, Yarn, Less, and Less Watch Compiler. This is probably your first time using like a real tool like this. VS Code is probably like, VS Code and understanding Git are like also tools. But now these are like developer tools that we're going to be using to progress in your career. You're going to be seeing these over and over in different flavors. Now, I want to be clear on something. The reason we're using Yarn is because we're also using React, and React and Yarn are made by the same company. And so we wanted to keep that congruency. It was really a congruency thing. But that being said, NPM does the job. So if you've got experience with NPM, I wouldn't actually force you to use Yarn. But those of you that are thinking I'm speaking crazy things right now, just use Yarn. It's great. We're going to be using it moving forward. But I just wanted to put that out there for any of you that are using NPS because it's just a package. In fact, I think it's worth talking about. Let's go look at what Node and NPS are doing. So NPM, sorry, what am I saying? NPM. Oh my gosh. This is going to be a rough day. I couldn't type earlier, can't type now. So in this thing, it stands for Node Package Manager, but they always change the name of it up here, and it makes me laugh. Newly purchased memories, if you refresh the page. Oh man, usually it changes on a new refresh. It looks like my cookie's stuck, but it'll change that name. It should be different, randomly generated for everybody, and I love that. Side note. But what this does is allow us to bring in packages, and you come in here and you can actually use all these different packages and let other people use your code. And you're going, what the heck's a package? Well, a package is a small portion of JavaScript. It's a little library that does one thing, and it does one thing really well. And in our case, if you did the install, which you should have been doing this morning, and you felt some of that pain, you had to install some packages on your computer. And specifically, we had to install Less, right? And Less Watch Compiler. Let's go look at Less Watch Compiler, for example. So Less Watch Compiler is a dead simple Less Watch Compiler, Less CSS Watch Compiler. This thing allows us to watch our code so that we don't have to continue to save our code over and over. This will make more sense as I continue to explain things. I just want you to think about the concept that we've been installing something. So here's the Yarn install that you did, and then here's an NPM equivalent install. So that's why I'm saying they're pretty much synonymous, but they pretty much use the same technology under the hood. And that's why we can use them interchangeably. But I do say pick one, stick with it. It just makes your life easier moving forward. So, and then they have instructions on how to use it, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to go into that right now. I just want you to see that someone wrote code, gave us a tool, and we're using NPM or Yarn to get that tool on our machine. That's what's going on with NPM. It's basically a giant toolbox with a bunch of free tools. This gets controversial when you have to bring in 400 tools to build a fence. So sometimes developers will have so many dependencies to build something so simple that it kind of irks me. But now is not the time for opinion. We need to think about the tool and the concept and understand that using these things can make us faster and better developers, like linters, for example, or prettier, or all these different things that are out there in the world of programming we can use to make our code better. So NPM is a tool for that. So coming back to the CodePen that I provided, we're going to talk about using some of these tools. Now, we're not going to NPM install inside of CodePen. They've already done that on their server. So they've already installed packages on their server that we can use. So I want to make sure this doesn't feel too magical from what I'm about to do. So if you notice over here, we've got basically all the things we've been learning, right? We've got REMs, we've got media queries, we've got everything. Everything that we've learned is in here. As we scroll in here, it's looking good. All the stuff's there. Sweet. Okay. So this should all be review and nothing new. So what are we going to do with the stuff that we've already done today? Well, we're going to enhance this stuff and make the CSS better by using a preprocessor. So what the heck is a preprocessor? Well, it's kind of in three parts. So I'm going to put a little comment block up here for us to use in the future. So what is a preprocessor? Really, it starts with syntax. And so we're going to be using the less syntax, and it's syntax that we code in. Like this is like how we write our code. It's not the same as CSS. This is where it's different. We write in a different syntax, a different set of rules. Those of you that are concerned about less versus Sass versus stylus versus blah, 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 there's 100 preprocessors probably. And there's 5 really big ones that a lot of people use. And if you learn one, I'm telling you, my friend, you've learned them all. So don't stress. Those of you that are like, I've heard Sass is industry standard. I've heard less is like, drop that. You need to understand that the pre-processing that I'm teaching you, it does not matter. It applies in all cases. So that's the syntax we're writing. Number 2, we're using a compiler. In this case, we're using Node. That's why I had you install Node and run those packages and everything. This is going to be the compiler of our less. So this is how we can even write the crazy stuff I'm about to show you, and you've probably looked in the training kit. So we're going to have variables. We're going to have basically functions in CSS through mixins. We're going to be having nesting, which is like one of the best features for organizing your code. So all these things happen because of the magic of the compiler. So that's the second part. The third part is the CSS, like the actual CSS. This is output from the compiler. Like this is produced from the compiler. Should not be edited ever again. Isn't that crazy to think about? Like you actually will never touch your vanilla CSS again if you're using a preprocessor. It's jarring to think about that. And I'm telling you, I don't use CSS anymore the way I used to. Like teaching you CSS is painful for me because I don't like writing in it. I like writing in a preprocessor. That's just because of habit, not because CSS is bad, because this is all CSS at the end of the day. Okay, so what is a preprocessor? It's made up of those 3 pieces. 1, a syntaxical piece. 2, a compiler. 3, the outputted CSS. That applies to pretty much every preprocessing lifecycle. So conceptually, let's go see how this works in action here and get it out of concept, I should say. So what I'm going to do in CodePen is I don't have to npm install or anything because they've already got it on the server. So they've got a drop down here under the CSS section. I want you to pay close attention. See how it says CSS right here? Okay, watch that in a second. So I can select any preprocessor of the popular brands here. We're going to go with less. And notice over here it says less. I'll keep the reset in here, no big deal. Hit save and close. And now you can see we're actually writing in less. Wait a second, Josh. You just said this was a different syntax. How does this stuff work down here? Well, great question. Very astute of you. The reality is this is still CSS. Like less can still be written in CSS like normal syntax. It is transferable. However, what is not transferable is the special less syntax into vanilla CSS. So let's talk about what that looks like. So one of the first concepts that I think is just beautiful is nesting. So I want to look at the HTML with you for a second. You can see over here, let me grab everything in Shift Tab so it all lines up. So you can see I've got a container and it's got a header in it. I've got my image, right? I've got my main content div, which probably should be a section tag, honestly. And then I've got, in fact, I'll do that really quick. Well, I guess not really because I'm using it presentationally. Oh yeah, and there's the section tag. Sorry, I was musing when I shouldn't have. So there's this div that's containing it, and it says main content, and it's got top content and bottom content. There we go. Got to get the full picture before you make a judgment. So then we've got button, footer, and then there's our website, right? So we've got a container, a header, an image, a main content, a button. Okay, seeing this really does help formulate how CSS should look. For example, if I wanted to change the, let's go into header and grab the H1. Well, in vanilla CSS, how am I doing that? So header H1, just like that, right? The thing is, this to me is not as intuitive as the HTML that I wrote. What would be intuitive to me as a new learner and as a lifelong user of CSS, it feels like, header like this should be H1 should be nested inside of header. Like, to me, that makes more sense because it's mimicking the HTML structure that we wrote. Because the H1 is literally inside of header. Like, why shouldn't it match that in CSS? Well, guess what? This is valid syntax in a preprocessor. So this is legit. So watch this. If I pop this in here, put font size 2rem, and delete this, nothing happened. And that's a good thing. That means it's working. So let's see what happens. Let's make it 4rem so it's really noticeable. There we go. So watch what happens when I turn off my preprocessor now. I'm gonna hit save, settings, none. Everything breaks. I lost my 4rem. So if we come down to our H1 again, you can see this is broken code. Vanilla CSS, at least in its current state in the browser, does not respect nesting. Good news, everybody. It will in the future. So nesting was just announced like this last week, 2 weeks ago, I think, as being considered for the standard in the new version of CSS. So I'm very excited about that personally, because you'll see why in a second, how useful this is. So I'm going to bring less back in. You can see it pops back in. Pretty cool. So in this case, our header H1, I'm going to bring it to the top of the page because the refresh is killing me, but we'll bring it back down when we're done. So here's my 4rem. Now here's something really, really cool about CodePen is that there's a drop down that lets you view your compiled CSS. It lets you view the final result. So let's walk through our preprocessor pieces and identify each one. So in this case, less syntax that we code in. This is unique to less. This concept of nesting is unique to less. You couldn't do this in normal CSS right now. So that is number one. You can see it's different, right? Then the compiler is over here, the drop down, right? So the compiler is on the server. It's already been pre-installed by the people that run CodePen for our convenience. You did not have that convenience, right, this morning. So this morning you had to go through and install that beast. So you are very familiar with compilers at this point. And then number three, the CSS that is outputted. We don't see that yet. And so now I'm going to show you right here where it says compiled. Let's see what happens. Click. And look at this. It looks just like the thing we wrote before, because it is. It's just CSS. That is like the best thing about preprocessors, is that you can't mess up vanilla CSS. You can only just make it better and enhance it. So that is a great example of all three portions of the preprocessor working together. All right, let me stop here, go to the questions thread. Okay. Kimberly says, what's a concrete example of using of how we'd use operators in CSS? I saw the example in TK adding on to pixels, but I'm not sure how operations in CSS would be useful. You know what, Kimberly? I love that comment because I agree with you. I don't use operators very much in my CSS. So I'm with you. I just want you to know about them, be exposed to the concept of them. But don't worry, that's a low use case scenario compared to everything else. So great, great observation. And the answer is, don't worry about it. I just want you to know about it. Sam, when do you hear the banjo? Only on, let's see, only on Fridays. And if you've been good, I'm just kidding. I'll play it on Friday. Which would you recommend to us newbies, NPM, Yarn? Are there upsides? My personal preference is NPM, but we have all of our instruction built around Yarn because of React. So for now, we're proffering Yarn, but in the future, I think we'll be transitioning to NPM. But it's because there's a constant fight, by the way. Right now, NPM is winning. They're faster. They've got a better library. And then Yarn learns from their mistakes and then surpasses them. And they keep doing this, which is so great for everybody. But Yarn was here last year, and now NPM is here. So it just depends. Okay. Should rem only be used for font size, or can it be used as a unit of measure? So Eric, this is rehashing yesterday, but I really like using rem for fonts and layout if you want your layout to change based on user settings. So that's a decision for you or a decision for Big Boss. It's a great question though, but the reality is it depends on how responsive you want your website to be to user settings. The recommendation is, users come first, accessibility. So I use percents on left and right and rems for font, pixels for top and bottom, and box model. I wrote that in the channel yesterday, but that's my way of coding. Everybody's different though. Should we always use a preprocessor? So David, if you worked with me, if I was your big boss, yes. Preprocessors, I use them in React, I use them in Vue, I use them everywhere I go. They're the most helpful, in my opinion, fastest way to write CSS. Other people would fight me on that, and that's okay. Where do you read up on CSS and HTML news? Honestly, for me, Twitter is a great place to go. You find the thought leaders in the technology that you're interested in, and they provide the best links. So Twitter. Hacker news is always good, but sometimes it's just like opinion flaming. But yeah, I think CSS and HTML, I would follow those. Like Chris Coyer, CSS Tricks, he's a great follow on Twitter. There's a lot of people that I follow on Twitter that are just really, really good. Like I follow a lot of Google's web team. They provide some of the best tips and tricks I've ever seen. Let's see, will preprocessors go away with nesting CSS? Well, I think when we get mixins and CSS modules become a real popular thing, I think preprocessors will go away, which I'd actually be fine with. Because I really only use preprocessors for nesting variables and mixins. Well, that's not true. I use it for the escaping as well. So we'll talk about those things. Do you always need to run less watch compiler running when editing a less file? Yes. Yes, you do. Because otherwise, if you didn't have that running, you would have to manually save your file, go back, refresh the CSS, run the file, run the less command, the compile command, every single time. Think about that. You would have to go to your terminal every time you hit save and run a file if you didn't have a compiler, a less watch compiler running. So be grateful for that, actually. Okay. Seems like you have to type more when you nest in CSS. It's not less efficient to type out, no pun intended. So when it comes to typing, don't get caught up in the seems like it's more typing. Think about the readability and the usability for the next developer, because you have to think about coming into somebody else's code. For example, look at all this code. It's not organized at all. It's all just like jacked up on one line, and there's like nesting here you can't really see. Once we introduce nesting throughout this whole site, you will quickly be able to read this and consume it so much faster as a developer. So you gain speed and usability. You'll see. You'll see. Hold on. We've only done one little thing here. Okay. Steven says, I'm trying to grasp why this is a big deal. What is the value of learning vanilla and now learning the less syntax? Seems like added complexity. How does this nested syntax make things better other than syntax preference? You will see. I've shown you one thing, but as we continue to use it, you will see. Will nesting and less have more specificity? It follows the same specificity pattern. Okay. There's a bunch of questions. I don't want to take up all of our time answering all questions, so I'm going to stop there, and we're going to continue to go forward with our lesson. So over here with our nesting, we've got our header and our H1. Everybody's going cool. Some of you are going, oh my gosh. Some of you are going, big deal. And I love it. I love that both thought processes are happening. So let's go through here and start nesting more things so we can see how valuable this could be. So I'll bring this back where it was. And as an exercise, I want you to do this with me. So go ahead, I'm gonna hit save, give you this. Let's do a little fingers on keyboard exercise together where you're coding along with me and having the same experience. So for you, remember, hit that fork button so that you can have your own code separate from mine. So what I want to do is go through and let's nest this whole website together. Let's see how this, let's use it fully and see how this works. So first off, I have an HTML tag. And you might be going, whoa, you could nest everything in your HTML tag. And the answer is, yes, syntactically you could. Should you do that? Absolutely not. Because then everything would have to be inside the HTML tag, and it'd be an unnecessary abstraction. Like it would actually hurt you, not help you, because HTML is assumed always. And so every time we write a selector, it looks from the right to left. So CSS doesn't start over here. It doesn't start up here and dig down. It starts over here and then goes up. And so if we can have the shortest chain to get there, it's better. So in this case, HTML is not something we would want to nest. Okay, here's our before and after box sizing border box. This combo right here is perfect. We don't need to touch it. No nesting needed. H1 through H5, no nesting needed. Image, no nesting needed. So you don't always need nesting. Like global styles are global for a reason. They're meant to go across multiple pages. So we're good here. P tag, global. Okay, container. Now we're getting into something that might not be global. So we have to make a decision here. So notice that I've got an extra class of home over here. And this is how a lot of times I'll decipher between specificity on multiple pages. So what I mean by that is we've got a home page, we've got an about page, we've got a flights page and a contact page. How am I supposed to get about page styles that are unique from the home page? Well, I could quickly change that to say about instead of home. And then all my specificity changes. That's how powerful classes can be. For now, I'm working on one home page, so it's kind of hard to visualize that. But if I were to copy and paste all this code and change it out to be a specific about page stuff, that's all I've got to do. It's really powerful. So if we come down here, I could hypothetically start nesting things inside of container. But again, container is too general. We don't want it to be specific on every single thing we do. Strong tag, definitely not, because it should be up here. Any elements, by the way, how I organize my CSS is I always try to put super general styles, like element level styles at the top of the page. Why? Because of the cascade, right? Because of inheritance. So when we start getting into named things like classes or specific header pieces, that's when we have to start thinking about nesting. All right. So container I would not touch. Header, okay, this is where things start to get interesting. So header is specific. It is something I could use maybe on all of these pages, right? Copy and paste this thing, get these 4 pieces in. So header is now one of our first candidates for nesting. So we come down here and we instantly see a media query. Man, wouldn't it be nice if we could put that media query and nest it inside of our header? Guess what? You can do it. So we'll grab this, pop it in here. That's right. You can nest media queries inside of selectors, alleviating this code right here. Don't need that anymore because it's already assumed. And look at that. Now you can see exactly what header's doing on its phone and on desktop. That's crazy. That's crazy powerful because you don't have to jump around and try to figure out where that is. Nope, it's all nested inside of header. Oh, and by the way, we gained JavaScript comments. So now I can do / / because I'm using Node compiler. And I can put a little comment here that says the end of header. So much more readable, so much more consumable. Okay, let's see how this continues to work. We've got an H1. Notice it's inside of header. Well, guess what? I don't need to do that anymore. I can get rid of this. I can pop it in here because it's nested. And of course, let's take it back to what it was before so it doesn't wreck our whole layout again. Now you can see the H1 is nested inside of header. Wow, that's so much cleaner, so much easier to read. Now let's go in here and look what we got. Another nested media query. Okay, let's find out how we do this. Remember, we go inside of our H1. We nest it inside of here. Get rid of the extra fluff because we don't need it anymore. Now that is cool because here's what's going on. Oh, we've even got a navigation system. Okay, let's go grab that. We throw it in here. Get rid of the header because it's already nested. And now our nav's inside of here. So now everything that is nested inside of header is matching our HTML. So our H1, our nav, everything. This is amazing because now we can see exactly what this thing is doing. And we actually can start seeing the beginnings of a word we like to use in JavaScript, which is called components. So this is starting to become a reusable component. We could start just copying and pasting this chunk of code together and it would look the same because components can be just HTML and CSS. So let's keep going. We've got ourselves a media query, right? So we'll go in here. Hopefully you're coding along with me. So we've got this in here, header nav. We're deleting this. There we go. I'm going to hit save and let you catch up with me because I want you to experience this. I want you to be nesting with me because it's a different feeling. Like it's really cool to be able to do this and be like, wow, this is so cool. Tim says, a little fast to be coding simultaneously. Great feedback. Just take the link I gave you. No big deal. Code as much as you can with me. So with the header nav A, this is an interesting thing. So we've got nav here, right? So I'm going to put a little comment here. Nav, just so I can see where it ends. So nice to have those comments. Now look, see this A tag? Well, wouldn't it be nice to put that inside the nav because it's nested? Well, we can. So all we do is just go under the media query, and there we go. We can just take this A tag, copy it in. By the way, I'm using Shift-Tab to get myself that nice spacing. So you should be doing that as well just to keep up with the speed there. But isn't that nice to see that anchor tag nested inside of our nav? And now you can start to see the pattern continue over and over, right? So here's my first anchor, taking it out of here, pop it again to nav, Shift-Tab, delete the old selector. So now you're going, whoa, this is crazy. Like now you can actually see the organization. You can minimize the selectors too, like if you want to make it really clean. So in this case, we've got our navigation. We're still, so yeah, we finished with our header now. So look at that. I can minimize my whole header component now. Isn't that cool? It's all contained. So what does it look like when it's compiled? You compiled. There's all of our global styles. And look, it's the same code we had before. It's the exact same code we had before, except this time there's no human error that could occur with the nesting. You know what I'm talking about. You know when you accidentally forget to nest something and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was in the wrong spot. That goes away when you use nesting, because the way you write your code prevents you from your own errors of accidentally nesting it somewhere else with the incorrect selector chain. Okay, so here's the problem. With great nesting comes great responsibility, because you can't go more than 4 deep. You don't want to nest so far down the chain, because then it's so specific, you might as well have an ID. It's not reusable. So we don't want to go past 4 if we can help it. 5 is like an outlier. What does that mean? Well, if we go down here, you have these curly braces, right? So right now I am 3 deep. If I go one more level, if I come into here and had another thing, something, that would be as far as I would ever want to go. And in fact, I would try to avoid going that far. So how do you avoid going further in that nesting if the HTML is actually nested that far? You just start further down the line. So for example, if I didn't want nav to go that far, I could just abstract it out and start it here and have it be its own separate nested piece. That is one way you could accomplish avoiding those levels of nesting, is taking a component at a shallow level and bringing it out. But we'll keep the nav up there for now. But I want you to be aware that going more than 4 is not recommended by even the people that write this stuff. So the community at large with preprocessors, when new people learn preprocessing, it's like, I want to nest everything. And then you start to find out how awful that is, because number one, performance, because you've got huge selector chains because people start nesting from like the body tag. And number 2 is specificity problems. All of a sudden your code's not reusable because you made it so specific. So be careful with nesting. Again, 3 to 4 is like probably the sweet spot. 5 is too far. Okay, so you can see why it's really valuable though, right? Now I've got this header component that I could, hypothetically, if I like this header, I could copy and paste this code elsewhere now on different projects and it would just work because I've done everything correctly. Meaning I could take this chunk of code here. So if I copied header and header, let's do it really quick as an exercise. So here's a new pen. Oops, didn't want to wreck my old thing. New pen. Don't worry about this, I'm just showing it to you. So we've got a last file in here. If I take my header and bring it over here, and then I take my pre-processed code, and of course there's a bunch of general styles that are going to happen. So you don't want to discount those. But in general, it's going to give me the same layout, which is super powerful and reusable. And so these are the kind of things that you want to consider. And of course, we have the reset in there, so we'll at least throw that in because it was there. But awesome, right? Reusable code. So pre-processing allows us to think more in a component and less in like thousands of lines of CSS. Okay, let's keep going. So what I want you to do is I want you for the next 5 minutes to go and nest the rest of this on your own. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. We'll start the timer, and then we'll talk about our learnings there. So let me give you the code. Actually, I just posted it, so it's just a little bit up in the main channel. I'll hit save. Make sure you refresh if you've got an old version. Ready? Nest the rest of the code. Okay. So as you went through your nesting, I'm going to nest really quickly now because you've all gone through this or have been doing it. And I want to see if there's any mistakes. So I'll code here, just watch. And you tell me if you think anything didn't make any sense. So I'm going to go through here. And we're going to nest our media query inside. And remember, we get rid of the extra fluff. So if you forgot to do that now. It's really important. Grab the section tag, pop it in here. I'm just going to reformat at the end just to speed it up because hopefully you've all been doing this. Main content section. So this thing's going to go inside of our section tag. Whoa, did not mean to do that. Again, don't need this stuff here. Okay, so that's our main content section. So I'm just going to shift tab to get all that nicely formatted goodness. And then I'm going to go down to my main footer. Look at all this code we just saved right here. For those of you that were saying, looks like more. Pshaw. So if we have main footer, nav, come in here, pop this out. And then we've got our book of flight button is global, so it looks like we're good. Okay. So hopefully not a lot of nesting that went on here. Book of flight, if we go into our book of flight and grab this thing, well, what are we doing? We're nesting. Now this is interesting because this was where we were doing two nesting patterns, right? We were doing tablet and phone. So let's get both of them in here and talk about both of them, and then we'll take a break. I know we've gone a little bit over our normal break time. Actually, you know what? Let's take a break now that the nesting has occurred. I'll save this and give you our final nested version. And take a 5 minutes, 5-minute break. Let's get our brains a little break here. Step away from the computer. Okay. I didn't say it so loud that time, Tristan. Do not want to scare anybody on purpose. All right, so break time is over. I've been looking at all the questions, and Rain has just been dropping knowledge bombs on everybody. Let me see what Tim had to say. So what I'd love is to have access to the initial version. Yes, I will give that to you, Tim, and anybody else that wants it, so don't stress. At the end of this, I'll go dig it up and get you the original if you want to follow along. You know what I'll do actually, Tim, is I'll put it in I'll give it to Nathan to put in the YouTube description. So anybody that wants that can have it. I think that's a great suggestion. We could probably just do that moving forward, honestly. Guided projects should all start with the same starter file. Okay, so coming back to our code, I promise we talk about this media query thing right here. I don't think there was any questions that Rain didn't answer really well, or any other project manager for that matter. So if there's something that you feel like you want an extra answer to or clarity, go ahead and ask it, and I'll keep looking. But thank you, Rain. She's killing it. All right, so with the book flight button, we've got ourselves the desktop version. This is a desktop first approach. Why do I know that? Because I'm using max width, right? So max width is then layering on a higher number first because it's going to hit 515, and then it's going to hit the final number last. So there's our mobile, right? So notice that we're nesting multiple media queries, which is totally valid. And this is so good because you'll never have to guess where the book a flight button is going on tablet or phone or desktop. Like, it's unbelievable that, like, this is so good that you don't have to search around your code for even minutes of wasted time or accidental code rewriting or accidental specificity. Nope, it's all contained inside of these little encapsulated pieces. All right, now I'm going to show you something that's really going to blow your mind. Are you ready for this? I'm going to turn this into SAS. Ready? Nothing changed. It's all the same in SAS. Everything we've just done up until this point is directly the same thing, okay? Because we haven't introduced any of the syntactical pieces that are different. But this is exactly how it looks in SAS as well as less. So when I say you've learned one and you've learned the other, I'm not exaggerating. Okay, so let's get into something that is a little bit different syntactically, and that is variables. So variables can be used to store any value that we would like to use in a CSS property. So variables are usually stored at the top of the page. Oh yeah, I can just do this now. Variables. So with variables, we can reuse a hex code, for example, that we might be using 15 times in a website. And then having somebody come in and say, you know what, that orange I had you use, we're going to go with a gray. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's a crazy change. And you have to go through, find all the matching hex codes, Command F, make sure you don't screw up anybody else's hex code on accident. So variables are amazing because they allow us to quickly navigate those kinds of problems. So let's see this. Excuse me. So we have the @ symbol is the syntax for a variable. Unless, by the way, this is the last time I'll keep the comparisons going, but the only difference between SAS and less is that. Or whoop, that's not it. That the $ is used in SAS, whereas the @ symbol is used in less. Like I'm saying, they're so close. So inside of here with this variable name, this is where we can store information for later. So let's say that we wanted to store some information for later that we're using over and over. So usually colors are our best thing to look at, or numbers. Maybe we're using a font size that we're using over and over, like a 1.8 rem. So it's really like this example is trying to showcase a bunch of different things at once. Let's just take this background color button for a second and convert that into a variable, sorry. So one of the hardest things known to man is naming variables, like naming them so that the next developer can understand them. One thing that's really helped me is color naming. Let's see, did it start popping up? There it is, name that color. It does not matter how you do this. This is totally a side note and like a professional opinion. Where if you're working on a team, this is how I like to operate. Not everybody agrees with this, but if you're the big boss, you've got to have some semblance. Otherwise, you will get 10 different types of orange and 20 different types of gray, and like you'll see it. The grays are out of control. So what we can do is we can pop in the hex code, which I copied and pasted from our code, and it actually gives you a name, lightning yellow, and you can turn that into anything you want. The cool thing is, if another developer pops in a hex code that's similar to this, it'll also give them lightning yellow, alleviating a lot of the confusion between swatches. So you don't have literally 10 light grays, dark grays, black grays. Like you'll see it. You'll see it if you work on a team that doesn't have a naming convention. So if we come over here, we now have the concept of this being lightning yellow. So I'm going to say at lightning yellow, like that. And then I'm going to make a variable that matches it. I'm going to make it right here so you can see how it works. So I've got my hex code at lightning yellow, colon, and then I'm going to throw in my hex. It's the full thing. So let's make sure, yep, it still works because the button's yellow. If I were to change this to red, let's see. Am I messing something? Am I spelling something wrong? Oh, I probably got a variable up here at the top that's still goofing. So by the way, I've got an error right there. Can't have that. So that's something else I want to talk about after this because it's very valuable. The errors are thrown like that. So in this case, you can see I've got my, I gotta undo that because I didn't save it though. There we go. Sorry, technical difficulty right there. So in this case, you can see I've got this nested, or I've got this variable being held and used here. So this is great. This example is probably not great because we're not using lightning yellow right now, but we might use it in the future. And so whenever we might use something in the future, it's a great candidate for being a variable. And it doesn't hurt anything in our preprocessor because variables are they are lazy loaded in the compiler. What does that mean? That means that they are loaded at the very end and they're matched up with the right thing, and you don't need to worry about where they go. So as long as the variable is visible to the other thing that you're trying to get it to match up to, it'll work. Well, guess what's always visible? Global scope, right? Global scope is always visible. So you might be thinking, and if you've had some background in JavaScript, you're like, global, how could you? Well, the reality is it's not the same thing as JavaScript global because the compiler consumes everything, right? So if I were to minimize all these selectors down here, just so you can kind of see the lay of the land of how our whole app looks right now, our whole web page. If I put my variable up here, every single one of these nested pieces has access to it. That's a good thing. Because if you don't use a variable, guess what? The compiler does not tax you for it. It's not something that gets consumed and compiled out. So variables are kind of this amazing for free extra goodness that you can use as much as you want without worrying about performance. Because at the end of the day, meaning at the end of the compiler, everything is just CSS. So down here, if I have book a flight button and I've got this at lightning yellow, I can use this variable as many times as I want. So if I wanted to go into my p tag and just throw in color and say at lightning yellow, that'll look awful, but let's try it. Just for reuse, that's how it looks. So we can use it over and over, and this is great because when you start working on teams with design patterns and specific colors that never change, you can put those things inside of variables and set them and forget them. Like you never have to worry about that weird hex color anymore. You can just call them what they are. So in this case, lightning yellow. So variables are used for a lot of things, but basically it's like reusability, font stacks, we'll be using variables. Let's talk about font stacks really quick. So inside of your code, oftentimes we'll have like a font, right? Let me go to Google Fonts. This is actually pretty fun. So Google Fonts has a bunch of open source fonts that we can use without paying any money for them. And we can tell them what kind of fonts we want. So if we want like a really fun font, we can go with like handwriting, and it'll give you a bunch of handwriting fonts. If you want a display font that is just meant to be cool looking, or a monospace font, which looks like you typed on a typewriter, or a sans serif font, which is much more readable, like these are the more popular ones. And of course, a serif font is like written in a book kind of font. So these kinds of categories are all available to you, and they're free. This is unbelievable. These fonts, some of these fonts in the early 2000s cost like $10,000 to use a font. And it was maddening as a freelance developer if you ran into a font that cost that much money and the client's like, I really like that font. I'm like, okay, you got to pay 10 grand. And they're like, I don't like that font. So then we'd have to start figuring out, well, what fonts are close enough? So Google Fonts came around and said, you know what, we're going to make this thing awesome for everybody. So let's go grab a crazy font just so we can see it change, like Pacifico. Why not? So if we go into Pacifico, it tells you how to use the font. This is not a lesson on Google Fonts, but actually one of your stretch goals is to use Google Fonts. So in this case, they give you a link tag and they tell you how to use it. So I can come in here, or you can use the import in CSS, which is fine too. We'll use the import. Let's just use the standard. I don't want to mess with imports right now. So if I come in here, I've got my my href tag over here. I can pop it up here at the top of the page. It'd probably be better to put it somewhere else though. So you see how the pen settings allow you to put those things in. So I'm just going to grab the insides of this thing like that. Let's just go see what that does in the URL. So it tries to go out. Oh, did I mess this last thing up here? Nope. Well, I wonder if it just puts it in the link tag. I'm interested. So if I go back to preprocessing, I pop this in. Okay, any URLs will be added here as a link in order and before the CSS. Okay, let's see if this, well, it does have an href in there. So I don't know if that'll actually work. Probably got to put the whole thing in there. Sorry, I'm learning with you. Don't want to do that to you on purpose. So if I pop this in here, does it need the href or just, I think it just needs the HTTPS. Here we go. Okay. Save and close. Nope, doesn't like that. It didn't hate that, did it? Invalid. Well, if I go to the import, maybe I can grab it here. I know I can just put the link tag in the page. So that's our last ditch effort, but I just want to see if this works. Okay. So now if I come in here and I use the font family Pacifico, it'll be really easy to see if we got it right or not. So I'm going to come in here and say font family Pacifico. It worked. Sweet. That's cool. So in this case, we've now got our font Pacifico. But here's the thing. If Google Fonts were to go down, which by the way has happened multiple times, and just random parts of the day, because who knows why, could be DDoS attacks or whatever. But in this case, if Pacifico doesn't exist, we have font stacks to fall back on the next font. So your computer does not have Pacifico, nor does my computer have Pacifico installed on it. So it's relying on Google's server to hold it for us. Well, if Pacifico doesn't exist, the backup is cursive. Let's see what happens. Okay, not the same thing as Pacifico, but that's the next best backup. So this is called a font stack. Basically, you stack the concept of what you want to happen just in case something breaks. Of course, you're trying to operate on best case scenario in this with Pacifico. But that's how you would use it. So let's say we wanted to put Pacifico in a variable. So we'd say Pacifico. We could then pop our font families. Well, we could pop all this content in here like that. Then let's say our H1s, we don't want it on all of them. Let's say we just want it on the international airport. So we open up header. We go to our H1. We say font family. Well, so that's what we want to happen eventually, right? But we're just going to pop in Pacifico. Pacifico. And there we go. And of course, this follows all the rules of other fonts, which is pretty cool because it's just math. All right. Pretty cool, right? So we can use variables for many things, not just colors, not just fonts. We could use it for values if we're using them inside of here. Okay. So that's variables. What's the use case? I think some of you might be going, this is cool. Where are you using them? I am really using them for these two things I just showed you. So font stacks and colors are like my go-to for variables. But if you find yourself repeating something over and over again, it's actually a really good use case. Okay, let me stop here and see if there's any questions that I need to answer. So Steven says, can you put the whole property in the variable with the preferred property value? Okay, let's try that out. So Steven's saying, wait a second, can we just do this? Put font family in there and then just reference Pacifico. So if we come over here, font family, Pacifico. I think we're going to get an error here. This doesn't look like it's working. Yeah, we're getting an error. I'm surprised that the compiler error is not showing up here. Usually we get a big red error in CodePen. So something's going on here. But the fact that this doesn't look right is telling me that there's something going on here. So it doesn't look like we can do that in that case because of the interpolation. So there we go, we're back to normal. So if we were to swap this out to say cursive, okay. So let's talk about interpolation. Interpolation is a fancy word that we use to talk about basically holding the place of something while you do something else. So for example, we're holding the place of the font stack right now until the compiler hits it. And so this is being interpolated or understood by the compiler, and then the correct thing is actually brought in. So if we look at the compiled code, we go down to our H1, you can see everything gets popped in normally. So that is exactly what I mean by interpolation. We're using the @Pacifico as a symbol, a placeholder for this content to be brought in later. And by the way, even if you could do that, even if you could put a whole property in there, I wouldn't recommend it because you don't want to mess with like the bare, like the core of CSS. You don't want to mess with properties like that. You want to just keep things on the right side. Let's see. Show how they can be used for margins, please. Sure, Greg. So it's just a matter of like how much margin, I guess. So if we came up here and let's say you started like building a system, Greg, like this could be cool, where you're just like, all right, I'm always going to say, I'm going to borrow from Bootstrap a little bit and say margin bottom 20. Like what if I started building my own system? So then I'm going to say that's always going to be margin bottom. So let's see if we can do this. I wonder if we can put it in string interpolation. Then it goes against what I was talking about because I don't want to mess with this stuff. This actually goes better with a mixin, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. So really, let's just use this for now. We'll just say MB20 and use 20px. And then I can just come in here and pop in margin bottom MB20. I've got to put my @ symbol in there. And then you can see the 20 pops in. And if I want to make it exaggerated, 120, see that? So that you can use it for pretty much any CSS property you can think of. As long as it's valid CSS, it's going to work. Okay, I'm going to delete that because it's just kind of a silly example. But hopefully you saw that, Greg, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's how it works. I didn't see where you posted a link in the Google Fonts. I did not post a link. So let me get you a Google Fonts link. All right. Let's see. So Tim talks about the reaction yellow doesn't help the issue of needing to change CSS code in many places. If you need to change it from yellow to blue, you can change the hex code when you declare the variables are still named lightning yellow. Confusing. Yes, I like that comment. So here's how we deal with that comment, Tim. Really like that comment. So what we like to do, because Tim's saying, wait a second, well, what if you did change this to red and now lightning yellow is not red? That sucks. That's an anti-pattern. I'm going, good on you, Tim, because what we normally do is something like this. We'll say main color, and then we'll pop in a variable reference. Aha. So now what we could do is we could pop in main color down here, and we could take out lightning yellow, for example. So there's main color. Now, if main color, like you said, Tim, very astutely, changes from lightning yellow, we could say, you know, plain old red. And if Big Boss comes in and says, we got to change the main color to red, well, then you just swap the variable instead of the hex code. So we use this pattern all the time when dealing with color, like issues with design teams. Pretty cool. It's very simple, right? But the concept here of using a variable with a variable really showcases interpolation even more, because we're using a placeholder here and then we're using a placeholder here. At the end of the day, all the variables go away. Watch this. See all these variables we wrote, compiled CSS, where'd they go? They got consumed. The compiler used them, transpiled them, put the place in the right spot, and deleted them. So there's no need for them in here. Like we just get the end result, which is lightning yellow or red or whatever. In this case, there it is right there. So that's why variables are awesome, because they don't hurt your process. They don't hurt your end result. It's just an amazing tool for you as a developer. Okay, awesome little jump there into how we can use variables effectively. All right, the next concept is, as we go back to the training kit, we've talked about nesting and variables. We've talked about nested at rules. Let me deep dive on that a little bit further, though. I want to make sure you understand what's really going on there. It's a little too easy. So in this case, we've got our header, and notice that there's not an extra tag in there, right? Because it's nested. It knows where to go. But this seems backwards because media queries are supposed to be wrapping around headers, right? Like in vanilla CSS, like that's how it should be. So how in the heck is this working? Well, that is because the compiler knows where it's nested, right? It knows that it's inside of header. And what it does is it bubbles it out. So let me grab this. It takes this and bubbles it out here. And so it wraps it around header. The compiler does that, so you don't have to worry about it. So let's go see what that looks like when we compile the code. Scroll down, and you can see there's the bubbling. So it bubbles out and says, okay, just for this, use these. So again, thank you, compiler, for having all these skills that we don't have to worry about computationally letting us do these things, because then we don't have to write all that extra code. It just does it for us. So that is what I'm talking about when I say nested. It bubbles the media query out. Do you need to be expert in knowing why that works? Not at all. You just need to know that it happens and that we can nest media queries. Like, don't be stressed about not knowing exactly how the compiler does everything. Like, focus on the bigger concept here on usage. And then if you've got extra time, you can dig deep into the code and really see how it works. But don't get caught up in that detail. Okay, so we've talked about variables, we've talked about nesting, nested at, we've talked about how we can use our compilers. Let's talk about the last and maybe biggest thing that we're going to address today, which is mixins. So mixins are pretty amazing, but I think when people see them, they just go nuts. They love them, but the use case of them can be pretty low compared to everything else we've been talking about. So nesting variables, high usage. Like every project I'm using those two things. Mixins, a little bit lower usage. So just, I want to put this warning before I start showing you these things, because I think sometimes people get really excited about this stuff and then they realize, oh, I'm not using it as much as I'm using nesting and variables. Okay, here we go. Mixins. So mixins, by the way, the terminology is the same between less and Sass. The syntax is not. So here's what a mixin looks like. Let's say that you wanted, let's say I wanted to center something over and over and not worry about it being changed. Let's say I wanted to center this book of flight button. So how do you do that? Well, you can display flex, right? So we can set up something called center, display flex, justify content, center, align, oh my gosh, align items, center. So that'd be great if we could reuse that, right? Guess what? You totally can. So inside of a preprocessor, we can actually throw some parentheses on here, and this will inform the compiler that you do not want to use this code as a class, and you actually want it to be consumed by the compiler. But we can actually use this to center things. So I'm going to bring this down with me as we journey into the button. So let's go look at our HTML first. So you can see the button is not actually in a good spot to have displayed flex on it, or on top of it, because of all these other pieces. So let's just add an arbitrary div really quick called btn container, just so it has something to keep it in there. I'm gonna have to paste this in here because it's in my clipboard. Don't worry about following along at all right now. Like, that was just during the nesting exercise. Hopefully you've not been freaking out. So inside of this button container, now we've got something we could display flex on. Notice that it looks like nothing changed. Why? Why? Tell me why. We added a whole new div here and nothing changed. How is that possible? What do you think? Critically thinking here. Why did nothing change here? So the reset gives it block. I mean, actually divs are just displayed block by default. So I like that you're thinking that way though, Jay. No presentational markups. We haven't put anything in there yet, right? Tristan says, I usually try everything till something works. That's right. That's what I do too when I'm learning. It's because it's a block level element and it's not messing with anything, right? Because it's just sitting here. So for example, if I were to put a border around this thing that we just made, which is called btn container, I said border 1px solid red, you can see there's that button container. So it's not actually invisible, it's just invisible to our eyes, right? So then we could nest it for sure if we wanted to. But by the way, we don't have to if we don't want to. So this is a good observation. Let's talk about this. This book of flight button, this might be something I want to use on multiple pages. So it'd actually be a disservice to try to nest this somewhere. Because why? Like, otherwise I'd have to have button container follow it everywhere. So I'm actually not going to nest it. So if I wanted to have this content in here, let's see if it works. Hey, it worked, right? So we have our display flex, justify content, align item center. The align items doesn't seem to be working. Did I spell that right? Align item? Align items? That should be right. Oh, there might be a margin. Yeah, there's margin on the bottom. Never mind. So I've got top, left, right, and bottom. So if I got rid of that bottom margin, there we go. So make sure you read your code. All right, so in this case, it is aligning in any way I need to. And of course, if I put top on here, you'd see the spacing. So there it is. So in this case, what if I wanted to reuse this and center other things later in my website? Like what if I could just pull this in? Well, you can. So you just type center and you got it. Isn't that cool? So this mixin is holding multiple properties in place, and then we can use them in here. So this is more like, remember how I was saying MB20? So that would be a better case for a mixin. So MB20 would be margin bottom 20. Margin bottom 20. Like you can start building a whole freaking system here of CSS, like if you memorized it and used it consistently, or you could throw these things on. Isn't that crazy? See the margin bottom here? So you can use multiple mixins to build these things. You should be using semicolons, sorry. So guess what? You can mix in mixins with other mixins. That's right. Yo, dog, I heard you like mixins. So I put a mixin in your mixin. So now we've got 20 pixels on the bottom and centered. That's right. We have mixception going on here. So this is a huge, awesome creative power that we gain as developers. And the funny thing is, when this thing is compiled, this is all about styles that get consumed. So I want to show you a difference here between these two mixins. I'm going to scroll to the top because I hate the refresh. But mixins are also lazy loaded. So in this case, we have center and MB20. Notice the difference. What's the big difference here between these two mixins syntactically? What do you see? Yes, it's the parentheses. So with the parentheses, if I compile these, watch the difference between the two. So one of them went away, one of them stayed. Parentheses are your best friend when using a mixin because you don't want to accidentally keep MB20. Like you don't want to accidentally keep a class there. So that's why we use parentheses so that they consume the mixin. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add parentheses here and compile again. And now look, everything's gone. And it's only used where it needs to be used. So see, MB20 is still being used. It's just now it was used by the compiler. So if we go to the bottom of the page and we look at our button again, look at all these styles we got. Flex, center, center, margin bottom. It's all there. Sweet. Because the compiler did all the hard work for us, so we don't have to think about it as developers. It's just we take the CSS, the browser understands CSS, and away we go. So here's the big ticket item of preprocessing. You don't use less files or SAS files in production. Like you don't actually put a less file up and use it on the internet. It's only for when you're developing on it as a developer on your machine. The CSS is what the server uses to show your stuff. So that's an interesting concept. So that means that when you're using a GitHub project, for example, you're actually putting up all of your less files on Git. And this might be beyond, but some of you that are interested in this, when you're working on a team with multiple CSS developers, you always git ignore the CSS file. Isn't that crazy to think about? You git ignore the CSS file so you don't have conflicts between all the compilations. So that's just like, whoa. If that's beyond our explanation right now, that's okay because it's out of scope. But those of you that are interested, it's pretty cool. So yeah, if you're hashtag confused, don't worry. But those of you that are feeling like, wow, that's pretty cool, I just wanted to give you a little insight onto that. So with mixins, we can do a lot of really cool things. But again, how often are we using these things? Not that often. Because usually you're just going right through your CSS, you're building your layout. It's when you start to see a pattern evolve, when you're like, oh, I actually need to use this over and over again. That's when a mixin should be like blowing your mind. Okay, I should be using that mixin. So again, Tristan and everybody else that said same, don't worry about the thing I said about servers. It seriously doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Okay, so let's go to the questions thread. Let's see. So, okay, one of the questions was asked, why do we need Node.js for Let's Watch compiler to work? And that is because Node, the engine of Node, is actually running our code. So here's another brain bender, is that the fact that we can use this / should be an indicator to you that we're using JavaScript syntax. Like we're using Node syntax right now. So it's like, whoa. So when we're writing less, and Sass, by the way, they can both use that compiler if we want. We're actually writing in a syntax that the compiler understands and giving us those extra comments right there that, like, these comments would be invalid if we didn't have a preprocessor running. So this is a good indicator that we're using Node. The fact that we can even use / in CSS. So the reason we need it is because it is the engine that understands the syntax that we're writing. It's the compiler. Okay, so if you inspect it, what shows? Great question, Michael. So if you inspect it right now, if we were to inspect our code, let's go look at the button because that's where our mixins were. So I'll scroll up here. You can see all the code that we've got on our button container. And notice it does not tell you where it came from, right? It's just like, no, this is CSS. The problem with this is you want to know where things came from when you're developing, right? You want to know, like, where did that thing come from? So the good news is we can actually use map files. That's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. But if you're interested, Google that later this afternoon, is using a map source file and less. And that'll give you, it's just another flag in your compiler. I wonder if it's actually right here. Configuration. So output main. So here it is, source map. So if we change the source map, there's the flag, it looks like right there. So if you run -- sort map in your Let's Watch compiler, you should have the map. And what that looks like is if you were to look under the hood of somebody that's using a map, you would see the less line where it is instead of nothing. So just so you know, if you're interested in that. Again, that's extra. Don't stress on that one. Okay, still looking at questions. I don't want to re-answer questions that I know project managers have answered, though. So, Peter, you talked about underscores. Let me see what you said. I can't see it. Nancy, now I'm wondering if Slido's better. Questions are coming in like crazy. Not sure who's been answered yet. That's a tough one. Man, yeah, it is more efficient for the questions, but sometimes I worry that the questions are answered in the questions thread as well. I want all the questions to be answered if possible. Well, I'll tell you what, I can go make a room for it really quick because I know how to do this every day. So we can come over here, responsive web design, change this out to preprocessing. Get the link, save it. Like that. Okay. Ask those questions there. that maybe that weren't answered already in your questions thread. And this was last time. Okay, so if the parentheses are optional, doesn't that mean any class selector can be a mixin? Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. So very astute observation. So basically, anything is free game for a mixin in this wild west of less. Like as long as it can be held inside of a class, it can be reused. You're not wrong. So that's why we want to use those parentheses again to make sure the next developer knows we're using a mixin. So best practice. There is a best practice here, regardless of Big Boss. I know a lot of you want that. It's always nice to have something that's like solid. Having your variables and your mixins at the top of a page is best practice so that the next developer knows what you were trying to do. You can reference those if they run into them. Also, best practice, use parentheses for every mixin because of that exact reason. Okay, should we use map for things like color to have a global struct for quick changes? Map is more about seeing where things came from. And it's more for you as a developer. It's not for the user. So that's a question for you. You're the big boss in that scenario. So if you want to see where that came from, for sure. But the user has no impact. With implementing LES or SAS, is it better to call images from compiled CSS from the HTML? Images are different. Like, so it just depends on, like, it's just CSS. So there's nothing special about LES and SAS regarding images. So nothing there is new. It's either you can use a background image if you want, or if you want to put it in the HTML, that's fine too. So no difference there. How do we get LES into our previous projects? I didn't work when I tried to turn it on in previous projects. Okay, so if you want to get LES working, you have to have, number one, a .les file. So I think we're actually ready to start talking about the project now. Man, we've been talking a long time. Let's take a 5-minute break. When we come back, I'll reveal the project to you. We'll talk about how to get this running on your machine, and I'll answer the rest of the questions. Let's take a 5-minute breather though. All right. Hopefully that didn't scare you. All right, let's talk about the project, and let me answer any questions we have in here. I have heard of post-processing. Yes, so post-processing, pre-processing, the same concept exists where you're writing in a certain specific way and it outputs to another specific way, but the concept is the same. Okay, so let's go to the project here and talk about how you could get an old project up to speed with pre-processing as well. So we're going to be doing a digital resume today. This is not the same thing as a portfolio. It's a resume. The portfolio goes nicely with this. So this is going to be kind of an opposite experience. Yesterday, I gave you massive code bases to try to like grapple with and just put your content in and just observe. Today, I'm going to have you start from scratch. So you're going to build it from zero. So it's going to flex all parts of our CSS muscles today going through this week. So with Preprocessing 1 digital resume, you've basically got a design file I have provided to you of like Johnny Appleseed, web dev, technology's my jam. I don't know. Couldn't come up with stuff. But in this case, this is a resume layout that we could use. And if you don't have that creative bone right now and you're just like treading water and just trying to stay afloat with CSS, use this as your guide. If you're feeling a little bit more confident, you want to kind of branch out and try something, build your own resume. Obviously, I want you to build your own resume here if you can. Like I'm just giving you an example. But this stuff could be really great to put on your portfolio website if you take it seriously. Some people don't take this seriously. I would recommend you do because it could be really cool for you. So here's how it works. First off, you just do the normal git flow. And then task 2, set up your preprocessor. So let's talk about the preprocessor because this answers the question of how could I get other projects to be preprocessed. So on a file system level, you will see we've got a less folder here. So this less folder contains an index.less file. So the only thing that I don't like about CodePen in teaching right now is it does abstract away a lot of the things we're doing into the server. When in reality, on your local machine, it's like this. So I kind of want to walk through this with you. Here, I'll just set up the project with you. I think that'd be a good use case of our time. So I'm going to go ahead and clone. Well, first off, make sure it's forked, right? So I'm going to fork it over to my account. That's what it's doing. I don't know if you have your volume on. And then in this case, Preprocessing 1, we've got Big Knell now has it. I'm going to clone this, and I've got the URL. So I'm going to grab that. All right, now I'm going to go down to my terminal. So let me open that up and share it. And of course, terminal is what Mac uses, but open up whatever tool you use. I'm not asking you to do that right now. Like this is recorded, so just follow along with me, just mentally. So here we go. I've got to get into a folder I want to get this into, which I'll just go into documents because I know it's a safe spot to land. I'm going to go into my Git folder. And I'm going to, so here's my Git folder, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oops, because I'm bringing the folder in, I'm going to say git clone and bring in the URL, right? Like this is, you should be using this every day. So I'm going to hit enter. Oh, I've already got it on my machine. I'll go up a path and do it again in the documents folder. No big deal. So in this case, I've got the project on my machine. I've then got a CD into it. So Preprocessing 1, ls, and here we are. So basically I've got the project on my machine. So if we're following the best standards of what we're going to do, we've got to build a branch that matches, right? So if I'm following everything on the README file, I've got to go in there and say, okay, create a new branch using git checkout. -b, which creates the branch. Checkout, of course, is the command to change to the branch. So B is letting us know it's a new branch, and you're supposed to use your first and last name. So I've now made a new branch called Josh Knell, so I'm off of master, right? So now I'm ready to start coding. So the problem is my preprocessor, how do I get this thing running? Well, pay attention to the less folder and the CSS folder. So I have a command on training kit right now, right? Less watch compiler. So before I do this, I want to show you why we use this, because if we don't use it, it makes no sense. Like you're using it, but you don't understand why, and I hate that. I want to make sure we understand that. So let me open up my VS Code with you and show you what this looks like in an example, non-example way. So I'm going to go grab Preprocessing 1. There you are. I'm going to open it up in VS Code, and then I will show it to you in VS Code. The reason I have to jump around is because my monitor is so freaking wide. So I can't show you my full screen. It'll ruin the YouTube video. So I come over here, index.html, my resume, and I want you to notice something really interesting. It's pointing at index.css. This is what I mean when I'm saying it's all CSS at the end of the day. It's not pointing at a less file. Where is the less file? It's over here in the folder structure. So this is where we're writing our code. So here's our big reset that I gave you. Here's a box sizing border box. Probably should update this to be better, but this works. And you can start coding after this line. So let's go to our CSS file in its current state. It's empty because I haven't run the compiler yet. So in VS Code, we can have multiple views. So over here, you can see I've got my less file, right? And I've got my CSS file. You can see, I'll shut this down. You can see the difference, right? There's nothing been compiled yet. The CSS file doesn't have the code on the left. I have to run the compiler one time to see this. Okay, this is really important. You need to see this difference here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my terminal here. There we go. And I'm going to run the command that's from the less website. So I'm going to go to lesscss.org, and they have the command. And I'll just type it in terminal, so don't worry about it. So their command to run at one time looks like this. Less C, which stands for compile. So the C is for compile. So less C. And then what you've got to do? Well, you've got to find out the file you need to compile. Well, what is it? What's the path? Based on my folder structure you're looking at here. So less, okay, I haven't seen the full path yet. There it is, Seth, good job. So it's the less folder, and then we know there's a file in there called index.less. You can't see it here because it's abstracted, you know, it's inside of a folder, but you saw it when we looked in VS Code. So step one, you've got to figure out where your code is supposed to be understood. Step two, where does your code go after it's been compiled? What's the next one? Yep, that's right, Christina. CSS / and then it's going to be index.css. Does that make sense? Like, I want to make sure this makes sense right here. We have to figure out where our special syntax is, and then we have to figure out where it goes after it's been compiled. Okay, I'm going to hit enter. No errors. I'm going to go back to my VS Code. Look at that. Remember how this was blank before? Now it's got all my new styles in it. So let me show you how awful this workflow is. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say background. Well, I don't know why I'm just writing CSS properties. I'm going to go to HTML by itself again. I'm going to say background red. I'm going to hit save. Nothing changed over here. Why? Because the default behavior of less is you got to run that compiler command again. Oh, that sucks. So if we come back to our preprocessor, I've got to run this again after I saved it. So I'm going to hit up to save myself some time from writing it again. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to go back to my VS Code. Do you see how awful my life is right now? And there it is, background red. Wow, that sucks. That is the basics of preprocessing, like one line by line, save by save. So now let's bring in our new and improved tool. So I had you install Less Watch Compiler. So here we go. Less Watch Compiler, because that's the package we installed. And the cool thing is it only needs to folder structure it because it already understands what's inside of them. So I only have to type less. I don't have to do slash index whatever anymore. And it just wants to know where it should go. So I only have to do one folder. That's pretty sick. Also, the last command that I wrote in here, index.less, tells it specifically which file to compile inside of the less. If we don't do this, it won't hurt us right now today, but tomorrow when we introduce multiple less files for imports, this is going to be the key to success. But for now, we'll talk about this tomorrow, but for now understand that it's looking for the index.less file. All right, I'm going to hit enter. Now watch this, watching directory for file changes. Okay, cool. I go back to my Visual Studio Code, and let's say I change this to green. I hit save, and I get green instantly. So I don't have to go back and run that stupid compile command. So Less Watch Compiler is amazing. Every time you hit save, it's going to compile for you. So if I delete this and hit save, so I've got an error, let's see what happens. It looks like everything's fine, but it's not. So you've got to have your compiler open at all times. You can't shut it down. So here's what happened in my compiler in terminal. Unrecognized input, possibly missing something on this line. Go see if you can fix it. Like it tries to give you a hint at where you messed up. I cannot tell you how important this is as a developer to have basically someone checking your code 24/7. Like, this is so good. You shouldn't be annoyed by error messages. You should be excited because you're like, oh man, I'm so glad, because if I didn't have this before in vanilla CSS, it doesn't say anything. It just silently kills you. CSS doesn't care about you. The preprocessor does. So then what do? I'm going to go back to my code, put the curly brace in, and watch the compilers hit it as soon as I hit save. Save. Everything's back to normal. Ready to go. So occasionally the compiler will get stuck on an error, and it won't look like it's working. In those scenarios, you can hit Command C or Control. Actually, it's Control C on a Mac, and should be Control C on a PC, and it will kill the compilation. All you got to do to get it back up and running is just hit your arrow key up, get your last command, and run it again. So if you're ever stuck and your compiler just feels like it's broken, Control C, Command C. Actually, it's just Control C. I have my keyboard mapped to a PC mapping, so that's why it's confusing sometimes. So C, in that case, we're good to go. All right. Some of you might be stressing right now thinking, oh man, I've got to compile with my terminal open and I've got to do GitHub. Well, guess what? You can use, at least in a Mac and PC, it's simple. You just make a new window, but Control T will give you another window, and you can run all your Git stuff in here. So it's like Git status and start looking at all your stuff over here. So this is how I would operate if I needed to do both. So the compiler is always running, always watching. Then as soon as you make a change, and if you want to put it up there, you run over to your Git side and you're ready to go. Otherwise, you can just do Control N for a new terminal window and just have two terminal windows if you don't like the side-by-side. Because yes, you do need to run your compiler all the time. So it's always up running. And it's a great place to look if you feel like something's broken. All right, so Control C will restart. It'll turn off your compiler. So let me do it again, Gustavo. Oops, I'm using the wrong mapping, sorry. So there we go, Control C. And there you go. So it turns off the compiler. And then run it again. Yeah, so how do you have two tabs? Control T inside of, that only works in Mac. I don't think you can control on a PC. Let me know if you can. If you're on a PC, try it out. I think PC has to do the new window. Sorry PCs. Thanks for that clarification, Ruben. It's Command T. Again, I've got my keyboard mapped to a PC. I've got a PC keyboard on a Mac, and so that Windows key is awful. I don't like using it. So that's why I'm all discombobulated. Sorry. Okay. Whoops. So there you go. That is how you do it. That's how you're going to operate this afternoon. Okay. Now you've just got to start working on that resume. Start using your own CSS. Inevitably, I see people get really excited about this project today because you start to see how much faster you can code using a preprocessor. Like everything is just faster. You can churn through your code so much faster because it maps to your HTML. So my favorite thing to do, you don't even need your CSS file open. Just stare at your last file because if your compiler is running, no worries. So in this case, now you can just cruise through this content like div, container, and you can bust through and like start building out all the things you want to build. And then over here, it matches, right? It matches the same thing. So you can say header, and then you've got your nav and your A tag. Like it's one-to-one. So in that way, it's just like so beautiful because you don't have to worry about that weird, nesting selectors and all that stuff. Like, nope, everything in here is matching and you can nest it perfectly. And of course, I would keep, just make a comment here, like variables. A comment here if you want to put in mixins. And so if you had a color, right, like so main color, and we popped in a red or something, come in here, main color, so color, at main color. It's even faster in VS Code because of the auto completions. And then, of course, we could say, testing. So we save these things. We've got our compiler running. If I go back to the browser and look at this, well, it's not going to look good because I've got a background of green. So let me kill that really quick. So let me get my browser open. Okay, there's my browser, and then there's everybody else. So you can see there's my red testing. So I would recommend doing this. It's actually in the instructions to get the background to go red first, just to make sure your compiler's running before you start going crazy and throwing your keyboard out the window. Okay, you are prepared. You can do it. Pre-process away, my friends. I will see you tomorrow where we're going to dig even deeper into these concepts. Believe me, there's more we can go. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be super fun. And by the end of today, I think you're going to have way more confidence in just CSS in general. Oh, there's some questions in Slido. Okay. Will we be covering tree shaking? No. So this is how we would edit the CSS in our portfolio web templates? Yes. If you were going to be using the SAS preprocessor, yes. How do we get less into our previous projects? Oh, okay, so how you get it in there is you have a less folder and you have a CSS folder, and then you transfer everything over. So if I were to go to like the Great Idea webpage, for example, and I wanted to transfer that knowledge over, I would have to copy and paste all my code into my index.ls file, right? So everything's got to be in your index.ls file. So if we used this folder structure as a guide, like just use this folder structure as your guide for older projects. Throw in a less folder, throw in an index.ls file, and then copy and paste all your code in here. And that's how you start. That's how you convert a vanilla into a preprocessed workflow. And then go through, start nesting it, start using variables, and use the same commands, less watch compiler, less CSS, index.ls. So that's how you would do that. Do we need to stop the less watch compiler? I would recommend yes, you do that, because the compiler is going to try to run every time a change occurs. And so if you swap branches, for example, it's going to like, oh, something happened, and it's going to try to run. So I would recommend stopping when you want to make a commit. Can you run terminal in VS Code? Yes, everything you're doing, everything I just showed you can actually be integrated into VS Code. But I don't want you to like lose precious hours doing that if you're not familiar with it. I personally, by the way, like having the abstracted terminal out of VS Code. I don't like the integrated environment that way. I'm weird. How long does the compiler watch for? It watches until you turn it off. So if you don't turn it off, it'll watch till you turn off your computer. How many times do we have to iterate the sequence? So every time you hit save, it happens. So you're not doing anything. The compiler is. What type of relation should our commits have with this process? Same relation as before, where you're finishing off a concept, like you're finishing off a feature. So let's say you knocked out the navigation. That's a great time to commit. Let's say you knocked out the top portion of the header. That's a great time to commit. Let's say you knocked out the left sidebar of the resume. That's a great time to commit. So every time you get a little feature done, that's a great time to commit. Okay. Oh, one more. Here we go. You have already answered this, but nesting in SAS, you can use ampersand for additional elements. Yes. Same thing in SAS. So what you're talking about is the parent selector. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow, but just really quick since you asked. So you see how we've got a button, right? Well, we can use the ampersand like this to select the parent. So it's called a parent selector. And so, oops, what am I doing? Oh my gosh. My keyboard's freaking out here. So with the ampersand, let's go look at our last CSS documentation. I want to show you where you can get all this. Everything here, everything on the train kit can be found here. Everything I talked about can be found here. And so as you look inside of nesting, you can see there's some other extra rules in here. And you can see there's this weird selector here. So they call it the selector parent. And so in this case, the ampersand represents whatever you're nested into. So if I come back to my code, where's my code? Over here. Oops, I had it backwards in my mind. So you see over here how they have these pseudo selectors. So you can say after or before or hover, right? So we're going to use hover because we're in a button. And I can just change the background to another color. We'll just keep it simple right now, just to showcase it before you take off. So we'll talk about this tomorrow, but this is pretty cool. So I'll delete it for now, but it's cool. Everything is in the documentation. Okay, thanks everybody. Tomorrow we'll talk about parametric mixins, imports, escaping, a bunch of awesome advanced topics. So get excited. Enjoy your lunch. See you tomorrow.